everyone. Welcome. My name is Dr. Araceli Hernandez Laroche. I'm a professor at USC Upstate, and I serve on the Presidential Search Committee as the representative of the USC system. Before I introduce our distinguished guests, please know that this forum is live streamed and taped. During the Q&A, please ask your questions clearly, and please be brief with your questions so that we allow more people to ask questions. After the 30-minute presentation, please use the microphones. There will be microphones on both sides. And if you're not able to go to one of the two areas, then raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone to you. We must keep the candidate on schedule, so we apologize if we don't have time for all of your questions. I would now like to introduce our presidential candidate. Bob Caslen serves as the senior counsel to the president of the University of Central Florida with the task to drive organizational, regulatory, and cultural change at UCF. He's also serving as the interim chief financial officer. Prior to joining UCF, Caslen served as the 59th superintendent president of the United States Military Academy at West Point, the culmination of his military career. Please help me welcome Bob Caslen.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am really honored to be here. I first want to say a big thanks to the Board of Trustees for trusting me at least to get at this particular point in the search process. I also want to thank the search committee for the search committee's work, and I've known they've done some great work. And I also want to thank all of you as attendees to take time out of your busy calendars to come here and spend an hour with me this afternoon and get to know me a little bit better. So I appreciate that very much. A little background about myself. I'm a husband to my beautiful wife of 42 years. She's watching this thing right now. Hi, Shelly. Hon, I love you. And I'm a father of 3 grown children. All of them are in public service. One works as a firefighter first responder. Another one is a FBI special agent up in Washington, D.C., and the other one is in the United States Army as a captain in the Army out of Fort Irwin, California. And they've blessed our family with 4 beautiful grandchildren, 6-year-old and 5-year-olds, 2 or 3 years old. And a couple of them were just at our house in Florida here recently, and we spent the afternoon of the day in Disney World, you know, in the space rockets and all that sort of thing. So we had a blast. It was great for Grandpa to be able to do something like that. My background is that my last name used to be Casalingo. So if you recognize Casalingo, that's Italian. I'm 3rd generation Italian. My dad was first generation, I'm 2nd generation, get my math straight. And all 4 of my grandparents, by the way, were born in Italy and immigrated through Ellis Island, and they ended up blue-collar workers in the state of Connecticut. And my grandfather used to be a Casalingo, and he tried to Americanize his name, and I ended up with Caslen. So I know Mario is out there someplace as a faculty senate, so I'm trying to relate with him and get some karma going, you know, because of as the Italian front there. I was born in Connecticut, and then my dad was a World War II veteran. After the war, he got into education, and he was principally doing the elementary school education. He was a school principal. At some particular point, I think he got a little frustrated, and Mom and Dad went skiing in Vermont for vacation. And my dad wanted to get out of education and get into skiing, so he bought a ski lodge up in northern Vermont. Still being in middle school, he dragged the entire family all the way up to Vermont, and it was a family business, so I learned how to wash dishes and wait on tables and clean the sheets and the beds up there, and so that's kind of my background. But out of that background, going to high school in Vermont, which was about 20 miles from where I actually lived, I got to play a lot of sports like football and the ski team on the track team, and it was through the football program that West Point, United States Military Academy, found me from an all-state selection. So they invited me to be one of their recruits. So checking out West Point and going down and take a look at it, I realized that I'm not sure I wanted to do this. It was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War was going on. Ironically, at that particular time, all of my high school teachers found ways not to go to Vietnam, and they were trying to talk me out of going to West Point. But when I got to West Point, I saw not only a beautiful place, but some tremendous opportunities. Plus, it was, before I had to make any commitment, 2 years of a free education. Back then, a free education was a big deal, so we jumped on that in a heartbeat. But when I got there, I realized how much I really loved the atmosphere. I loved the camaraderie. It was an all-male school at that time, that brotherhood. And I loved the football program that we were playing with, so I decided to do the additional 2 years and then the 5-year commitment. Absolutely had no intent whatsoever to stay past 5 years. Matter of fact, I married my wife 2 years after graduation. I said, "Hun, just hang in there for 3 more years." 39 years later, she was still with me. And, but nonetheless, you know, that was kind of where I was. But when I got in the Army, even though I wanted to do the 5 years, I just fell in love with working with these young men and women. So here I am as an infantry platoon leader, and I have 40 soldiers that really are dependent upon you as a leader in the good times and the bad times, to know their personal lives, to know their public lives, and just really, but that was that camaraderie, it was that brotherhood, it was that idea of being a member of a team and laying on the line for each other that really motivated me to hang out with this young generation and to continue to be inspired by them. And so that is really one of the reasons I stayed in the Army and I fell in love with it. During that time when I was thinking about getting out, I figured I needed a good education, so I ran and got my master's in business from Long Island University, and I got a master's in science from Kansas State, where I'm also on the Hall of Fame with Kansas State in the engineering department. And always had a desire to go get a doctorate degree. The one drawback of this particular candidate is the fact that he does not have a doctorate degree. But I kind of think that having been in leadership for 43 years in the United States Army, I like to say that I have a doctorate in leadership. And then while you're in the military at that particular point, committed to it, we went through the whole sequence, you may remember this, of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Then we had Operation Uphold Democracy in Haiti, where I participated in that and working with the United Nations, really getting broadened during that time. I had a stint in Central America supporting the Contras as they were dealing with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and the conflict that was going on in El Salvador. And then my progression finally got me back to the Pentagon, and I was in the Pentagon as a colonel in the Army on September 11th, 2001, 9/11. I was 2 sides over. It was an amazing day, as you can imagine. After the plane hit the Pentagon, we all had to evacuate. I was standing there watching the Pentagon on fire, realizing that life as we knew it was going to change. I tried to get back in the Pentagon. They sealed it off. They wouldn't let us get back in. I would not stand for that. Found a way to get inside the Pentagon, and we started helping out inside with all the things that were going on inside there, to the point of setting up the command center, making communications with the president and the White House. And it was a tough day, as those of you that remember. 2 months later, I found myself in Afghanistan, fighting in the war on terror at that particular point. I was the chief of staff of the operation that was going on over across the entire country. So I spent a lot of time with President Karzai and that whole operation, working at that level, and it was really interesting. After that, they brought me back to the Pentagon, and they put me on the Joint Staff with the responsibility to write the National Military Strategic Plan for the War on Terror. That was truly a broadening opportunity for me, because I had never written or been involved with strategies at the national level. And I really got the opportunity to really understand the power of a strategy, so that you understand what your outcomes are going to be, your strategic objectives, what the goals are, and tie the necessary metrics to make the proper assessments. So that when you have all these other ankle biter issues that are coming out, your strategy focuses you not only on purpose, but it focuses you on resources. So when people say, I need money for this or need money for this, you know, you can look at where your strategy is. And if the strategy is built collectively and you have that collateral participation, then you have buy-in from everybody. So everybody has full understanding and visibility of where the resources are applied and where they're not and why. Even though they may not agree with it, there's complete understanding. So I use that principle of planning and strategic planning and having collaborative involvement from all levels within the organization on all my subsequent assignments, because I realized how important that was. After that assignment, I was brought back to West Point as the Commandant of Cadets, but don't think of it as the Commandant of Cadets, as what I call the Dean of Student Affairs. I have responsibility and oversight of all of the students at West Point. It was really insightful. As a matter of fact, in that capacity, I got to know and got really close with a number of them, a lot of them, particularly the senior leaders. And we all knew, they knew that when they graduated, they were going to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. I knew that when I left that assignment, I was going to be a division commander leading 23,000 soldiers in northern Iraq. And surely about 50 or 60 of them were these young men and women that I knew as students that were now lieutenants working for me. And I'd go out there during the day and check on them to see how they're doing. I'd do my battlefield circulation. One who I was really close with at West Point, a kid named Dan Hyde, remarkably talented young man. And in the midst of our country at war, he wanted to be part of that 9/11 generation. And I'll never forget the day when I got word that he lost his life in Samara, which is where the Golden Mosque was, and if you remember where Zarqawi had blown that up to incite the Sunni-Shia strife. So I'll never forget Dan Hyde. As a matter of fact, to this day, I still wear his bracelet because I never want to forget the sacrifice of these incredible men and women, particularly those of the 9/11 generation and what they've done for our country. After that, I came back to the United States for almost 2 years and was given the command that had responsibility for all training and also education of all Army soldiers, 230,000 of them at all the different military schools, to include the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And after that, they threw me back in Iraq again. And when I was in Iraq this particular time, I was the senior commander on the ground during the U.S. drawdown in 2011. And I stayed for 2 years. So I had a 2-year deployment at that particular point. And it was painful because we went from 60,000 troops to 150. And we still had to maintain influence. I was the one on the ground meeting with Prime Minister Maliki through all of that at that particular time. Things started unraveling. If you remember, that was the rebirth of ISIS at that time. Fallujah fell, Ramadi fell, Hawija fell, and I left right before Mosul fell. But when Sunnis and Shias were at each other and Kurds and Arabs were at each other, they threw me in the middle of it to negotiate. And it was at that particular point I learned how to negotiate, and not so much learn, but I learned how to understand cultures, and I learned how to bring people together. I learned to try to find common ground so collectively we can move forward. And that's helped me significantly in all my follow-on assignments. So any work I do with the Board of Trustees, I don't necessarily look at it as the Kurds and the Arabs or the Sunnis and the Shias, but there's some great skills that were developed right there that as I work not only with the board, but also with the legislature down the street. But that was a really great experience. And then out of that job, I was hired to come be the superintendent of the President of the United States Military Academy, and did that from 2013 till I had mandatory retirement in 2018. So why do I tell you all this? Because I left West Point last July, and I went to USC in January, but that period in between, I really found the gap of what I really was missing. And I realized how much I appreciated and I admired and I was inspired by these young men and women. Not only men and women at West Point, but young men and women who are wanting to be better, make themselves better, want to be part of something bigger than themselves, want to go back into their communities and give back, and want to serve their state and serve their country and serve the corporate world. And to have the ability to be able to be a part of their development. And at this point in my life, I'm not looking to receive, but to everything that I've been blessed with the opportunity to give back. And so this particular job, why do people ask me why I want this job? Because I'm inspired by these young men and women. I admire what they're doing. I have a desire to be part of their development, and really, I want to give back. I want to give back to them, and if there's any legacy whatsoever, it's not a legacy in a building or with your name on it, it's legacy in the men and women that you had the ability to influence that are contributing back into their communities. And that's what inspires me more than anything. At West Point, we had to come up with a vision. That's what we do in order to get this strategic plan moving. So I remember coming up with a vision that said we are the preeminent leader development institution in the country. And my boss, who was Ray Odierno, the Chief of Staff of the Army, said, Caslen, show me someone who does it better than you anywhere in the world. So that was an easy fix. Yes, sir. We are the preeminent leader development institution in the world. Our mission statement was that we would educate, train, and inspire leaders of character. So at West Point, we would have an intellectual program for academic development. We would have a military program and a physical program, and we had a character program. But you may wonder, and this is important for us, why we didn't say, our mission statement did not say that we would educate, train, and inspire leaders who are intellectually competent or leaders who are militarily competent. We say educate, train, and inspire leaders of character. Because you could be number one in your class, but if you fail in character, you fail in leadership. It's as simple as that. And building leaders who are men and women of character becomes the most important thing that we do. This became abundantly clear to me when I was in northern Iraq as a division commander with those 23,000 soldiers, because I also had oversight of senior level misconduct that may occur. You know, there was senior level with the officers and the senior non-commissioned officers. And I was amazed at how many letters of reprimand I started writing and how many Article 15s I was doing. And every one of those was a termination of that officer's career. But it was not so much the termination of the career that impacted me, it was the impact that leader now had because of that abnormal behavior on the entire unit. And in some cases, we had to pull the unit out of combat, reassign a new leader, retrain them, and insert them back. So it had a combat effectiveness influence as well. So character is tremendously important. It's important in the corporate world. It's important right here at this university, bestowing the values that you uphold. And it's important in everything that we do. And matter of fact, I believe so much in character. We really focused at West Point a lot on character and character development. And I'm co-authoring a book with one of the professors at West Point. It's called The Character Edge, Winning the Right Way. So we have a publisher, St. Martin's, who we're excited about it. And I think we're on chapter 8 of 11 chapters right now, so we're excited to do that. If we were going to be the preeminent leader development institution, we had to prove that. And we accomplished that by being selected by both Forbes magazine and U.S. News and Report 4 out of the 5 years I was superintendent as the #1 public college in America. Very proud of that. And so as the #1 public college in America, if you're going to be preeminent, you're going to have preeminent dormitories, you're going to have preeminent academic buildings, and you're going to have everything you have, because it just focuses and pulls everybody together. So I said, okay, West Point was built in 1802. I think our dorms were built in 1803 because they were so old. So we really had to focus on that. So we were fortunate. We went to, my authorization, what came not from the state, it came from the nation. So fortunately, I had a couple of people on my board from the authorization committee in the House. And we spent a lot of time and energy, and we were able to obtain $850 million for the complete renovation of all of our dormitories. In addition, we had $165 million for a new dormitory. And then right before we left, we got the authorization for $125 million for a new academic building. And we worked with the United States Army for a 10-year plan to do a complete $900 million renovation for all of our academic buildings. So we had to fight tooth and nail over 5 years to get those authorizations, to get that capital expenses, and to be able to get everybody in support of us if we're going to be preeminent. And I'm very grateful that we were able to do that. That's over $2 billion that were coming our way, and we're very grateful for that. We had to focus on our, this war was really unique and different. So we had to focus on our academic program to make sure that the academic program was producing the intellectual outcomes that were necessary for our young men and women to be able to thrive in this complex environment. We brought a group in, we had to define what those outcomes were, critical thinking, problem solving, intellectual agility, so that you can recognize opportunity, or intellectual agility where opportunity doesn't exist, you create opportunity. Intellectual adaptability, so that you had intellectual competence across an entire spectrum. And these were the necessary outcomes. We had to make sure our curriculum was producing those outcomes in our graduates. Case in point, another war story, if I can bore you with that, please. But when I was the division commander at that time, in that same area in Samara and Balad, I had a battalion commander, West Point graduate, and a very contentious area, very hot, hostile area. So how does he want to solve the problem in this particular point? He finds 2 wealthy Iraqis. He develops a relationship with them, with the interpersonal skills, understanding that particular culture. They trust him enough to create an Iraqi bank. So now he's got someone who's going to create a bank. Well, banks are unheard of back in Saddam time frame, so this is all new to them. But they trusted him enough to do this, and they started lending money out, and they lent this money out to this old tomato paste factory that was all dilapidated and not working. And they made the repairs to the factory, got it up and running, and all of a sudden all the farmers in the area said, hey, now I can grow tomatoes because I can bring the tomatoes to this particular marketplace. And as they were thinking about that, they knew that they had to start farming again. They hadn't been farming for a number of years because the war was going on. So they had to in order to get the farming going, you had to do all kinds of irrigation, which means you had to get the water out of the river into the canals and out of the canals into the fields. The canals were all busted. They were full of silt. They had to be repaired. The pumps were not working because there was no electricity, and the electrical grid had to be completely rebid. So the farmers put pressure on the local government, and the local government responded, making it legitimate. And as a result of the local government becoming legitimate, the people started believing in that particular government as compared to, some of the adversary alternatives that they had. And next thing you know, they're growing tomatoes like crazy. They throw them in the back of their Toyota pickup trucks or driving down to the tomato paste factory, which, by the way, happens to be on the one and only road between Baghdad and Mosul. They're parked outside, plugging up the highway, and everybody's complaining. So one entrepreneur, Iraqi, says, I'm going to fix this problem, and he plows out a big parking lot. And then as they're waiting to drop off their tomatoes, they're hungry, and another entrepreneur, Iraqi, says, yeah, he starts a snack bar, which turns into a restaurant. Another one actually made a little motel. And then all these other side businesses started coming out of there, like tin cans for the tomatoes and labels, and the whole place started thriving as a result of this. And then Balad became not one of the most hostile, but one of the most placid areas in the entire area, in the entire northern Iraq. Because someone intellectually understood the complexity of that battlefield, and they were able to have the interpersonal skills to develop those relationships. And this is what was important as we studied our academic program and what necessary changes we had to do as we went through that whole process. Hugely influenced by my personal experiences in that regard. When I got to West Point in 2013, it was in the middle of all those national furloughs. Our civilian faculty was extremely disenfranchised. Morale was about an all-time low. 25% of our faculty is civilian. And as a result, they needed some attention. So contrary to what my provost or my dean was recommending to me, I said, we're going to create a committee of the civilian faculty, and I'm going to meet with them. I want to know, I want to listen, I want to hear what's on their mind. And it was very helpful and very beneficial as we listened. And I got all kinds of problems. So, matter of fact, they changed their name every meeting, and finally they became the Civilian Faculty Senate. Now, the dean, Senate means governance, so the dean got a little concerned about that. I said, just relax, it's okay. And we developed a great relationship. So I met with them every month with my staff, and as a result of that, they were bringing problems to me, and I was able to take those problems on. And in most cases, we resolved them. But it was not just academic problems. It was problems like parking, problems about coming to work on snow days, and all kinds of other different things that were out there, which all made perfect sense, but no one was listening. So we put those programs in place. And then I realized that my predecessor, God bless him, I love him, great friend of mine, but decisions were coming directly out of his office, and we talk about shared governance, non-existent. And I know there was a lot of concern among the entire staff and the faculty as a result of that. So we created shared governance. We created policy boards where we would have collaboration, and we would have participation at the lowest level up. So by the time it worked its way up and it got to me, I already had the buy-in that was necessary. All the issues were resolved at that particular point, and we had decisions that were easy to make because we had shared governance that was actually working. In the midst of shared governments, this is important, we also instituted academic freedom. I had never heard of academic freedom. Then when they explained it to me, they said, this guy can write something about you, and he's a major, and you're a general. And I said, well, in the Army, we don't do that. And so I said, okay, do I really have to sign up for this? And they said, yeah, you do, sir, yes, sir. So I did. So I'll talk a little bit later, but I started going on this campaign about, changing our attitude of mediocrity and learning how to win. So I had a major write an op-ed criticizing me with my emphasis on winning. I'll understand, I got that. And he published it in the Washington Post. And, so people are wondering, well, he's a major. See, they would see this as an act of subordination. But it was an education process for me as well to understand academic freedom and the power of academic freedom so that our professors, regardless at all level, can be able to speak and talk about things that are important to them without fear of reprisal or retribution. So that was great. We instituted that as well. Our research program at West Point was any professor that was out there that had a relationship with someone did independent research, that was it. And so we have to change this. So we created a vice president for research. And fortunately, we were in the Department of Defense, and it was amazing how much of the Department of Defense wanted to help us with research. We immediately got $45 million, got another $45 million, and we were about 140 or 150 after when I left. Nowhere near where you are, I recognize that, but most of that, almost all of it was from Department of Defense. And so fortunately, I've developed great relationships with a lot of those particular people. As a matter of fact, the Army has created this thing called the Futures Command. The Futures Command has oversight of all of the United States Army research. And guess who the second in charge of the Futures Command is? It's the guy who is a graduate of this institution. So he's the first guy I'm going to, make me your president, he's the first guy I'm going to call. So we can look at that. But nonetheless, we really, and we in order to deal with the research, what we wanted to do was establish centers of excellence, research centers of excellence, each one of our colleges or each one of our departments. And some of the really, we put a robotics one in there, we put the Counterterrorism Center, the Modern Warfare Institute, these are kind of defense related. And then the Army working with us, we established the Army Cyber Institute. And they do tremendous research, but their main mission in life is to create knowledge in the cyber realm and to develop public-private partnerships. And they had a budget of $25 million from the United States Army every year. So these are some of the things that we were able to do at West Point in the 5 years that I was in the research area. My board was, since we were a national level institution, it consists of 6 United States senators, 8 United States congressmen and congresswomen, and 8 presidential appointees. So I know how state politics work, but you know, and you see on TV how federal politics work, you know, so you can imagine of trying to deal with all that. But I never saw the board as adversaries. I always saw the board as partners, you know, people that I can work with and people that I can really develop a relationship with that can assist in the mission. And speaking of money, you know, we also had a campaign. I know you had a $1 billion campaign. Congratulations on that. When I got there at West Point, we had a $250 million campaign, and when I got there, we were woefully behind. So we had 3 years to go. So I recognize how important it is for the president to get involved in fundraising, to get involved in talking to our graduates, talking to other potential donors, even non-graduates, and we ended up raising $425 million. And you can bet that in this particular capacity, I understand and recognize how important that is for the president. I want to talk a little bit about diversity, if I could. Because when I got to West Point, I looked at the demographics of the student body, and I looked at the demographics of the Army and the demographics of the United States, and we were woefully out of line. We were out of line with our women, and we were out of line, particularly with African American and some Hispanics. And this was important. I didn't see it necessarily as important because diversity is important. We all talk that, we understand that. But we were the profession of arms, and in the profession of arms, our client is the American people. And it's important for us to have a relationship with our client, and that's a relationship that's built on trust. And if we fail to look like America in some capacity, then we risk becoming illegitimate in certain segments of America's eyes. Case in point, there were 8 congressional districts in New York City, and when I got there, only 5 of the 8 were nominating candidates to West Point. So I asked them, I said, why are you not nominating? And they said, well, it's Bush's war, and I don't want my colleagues and my client to be part of that. And I understood that. I said, but look at all the other opportunities that are available to them and different career paths that they can go. And then I worked with on Capitol Hill with the Congressional Black Caucus. First time I tried to schedule a meeting, only 1 staffer showed up. And I was able the next year to be able to get on the agenda for one of their luncheons. And it really broke things open at that particular point. So we were getting nominations from all congressional districts at that point right there. So our African-American population when I got there was 6-7%. The population of officers in the Army was 18 to 20%. The Army itself was 30%. That's how far behind we were. And by the time I left, we were up to 16 to 17% African Americans. We never lowered standards a bit. We had to come up with the right strategy to be able to do this. So not only working with Congress, but our strategy also worked with all of our West Point societies across America. So then we asked them to have STEM conferences and leadership and ethics conferences, and then go into their communities and invite these young men and women who in their freshman year in high school, even their senior year in high school, and develop a relationship with them. So that by the time they're seniors, they have a relationship, and as they're fully qualified to enter West Point, they're also going to meet the standards of the Ivy Leagues and some of those other schools. So why would they choose West Point? It's because of those relationships that were established. And the wall started crumbling, and we were starting to get those applicants in fully qualified at that particular point. I looked at our female population, 14, 15%. Women population in the officers in the United States Army, 17%. We were behind. And on top of that, we were just getting ready to open the combat arms to women. So I knew that the population was going to increase. So we worked the female population from 15 all the way to 22%, and that's what it was. We could have easily gone higher, but I wanted to at least be symmetric with what the Army requirements were at that point. But I'll tell you what, if you look at the demographics of West Point, it wasn't until 1976 when the first female came to West Point, and it was 80 when the first female graduated from West Point. And we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And during my time as the president, I was the first president at West Point to select a female provost of the United States Military Academy in the history of West Point. I was the first president of West Point to select the Commandant of Cadets or the Dean of Student Affairs, who was a woman for the first time in the history of West Point. And then just last year, my last year at West Point, the student who was in charge of the entire student body, we call that person the first captain, was an African-American woman. And people asked me, they said, Bob, did you pick her because she was a woman? I said, absolutely not. Did you pick her because she was African-American? Absolutely not. I said, because she was the best one that was out there. By far, we picked her on the merits of what she possessed. And on top of that, she's now a Rhodes Scholar in Cambridge, England, and that's the quality of people that were up there. So we've broken down barriers, and I have no problem doing that. A lot of people talk the talk, but there's not many that will produce. And I'm very proud to say that as the president of the United States Military Academy West Point, we were able to produce. I want to take on, I know I'm running out of time, I want to take on student safety, because particularly sexual harassment and sexual assaults. And we went after this, we put strategy, we put a lot of resources behind it, and we still have a long way to go. And not only the sexual assaults, but we want to take up some of the contributing measures towards sexual assault, particularly alcohol. And we had to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy training and educating our students on the impact consequences of alcohol, binge drinking, and things like that. And so we spent a lot of time with that. And then we had to really look at the one thing that was probably, the elephant in the room was a culture of mediocrity at West Point, where mediocrity is just average. And people were just doing just the minimum to get by. This manifested itself in a lot of ways, but America doesn't expect their leaders of their army to be average. They expect them to go out there, and when they put them in harm's way, they expect them not to do the best, not to look good, but to accomplish the mission and win, which means we have to transition from average to excellence and to have excellence in everything that we do. So we took this thing on about developing a culture of excellence, because as Coach K, also a West Point graduate, Coach K says, I always strive for excellence, because out of excellence, success naturally happens. So the big elephant in the room was the fact that West Point was losing to its rival, Navy, when I got there 12 years in a row. Crazy. It's unacceptable. There's no reason something like that should exist. Absolutely not. Matter of fact, when America turns on the Army-Navy football game, they don't look at the Army football team. They look at the future leaders of their Army, and when they see mistakes and they see fumbles and they see people off sides and they see holding penalties that stop these long drives, they say, what kind of discipline is the future leaders of our Army have? Because to me, it was the big picture of our relationship with our client, the American people. And it was just terrible. So we had to take this on. We had to get the right people on the bus. We had to really talk and transition this culture of mediocrity to a culture of excellence. And really, we were focused on discipline and mental and physical toughness. And medical and physical toughness in the Army is important because that's the crucible of ground combat, that in the worst of circumstances, you can have the ability to lead and lead your men and women through those circumstances. And by getting the right people on the bus, we had a great coach. And then 2 years afterwards, we finally beat Navy for the first time in 14 years, Hua. And then a year after that, we got, matter of fact, last April, I was standing in the Rose Garden with the Army football team behind my back, with coach and athletic director, with the President of the United States giving us the Commander-in-Chief trophy, the coveted Commander-in-Chief trophy, because not only we beat Navy, but we also beat Air Force. So I know it's not important to you, because it was a big deal for us. So, but really, it was the bigger issue, though, is not the Commander-in-Chief trophy. It's winning and winning honorably, because everybody wants to be a part and be with a winner. But it's also developing the skills that are necessary, that will be necessary after they graduate and get out into the community and corporate world. Okay, and real quick, I was hired by UCF because they had some issues with misappropriation of what they call E&G, Education and General Funds, which were operational funds, into capital expenditures. It was 5 years of $85 million and over 11 capital expenditures. Really tough. So we lost our president, we lost our CFO. The other CFO came in to take his place. She quit after a couple months, so that's why I'm the interim CFO right now. And we really had to make some changes organizationally. We had to align our policies and regulations, and now we're in the middle of culture change, so we can address some of these particular issues. And that's one of the big things I'm doing up at UCF. UCF's a great school, second largest college in America today. There's a lot of great growth lessons learned and takeaways from what they've accomplished and what they're experiencing. And matter of fact, their board has directed that they stop growing, if you can believe that. Stop growing. So they're trying to find what that means 5-10 years about if they stop growing right now. But they're going to come back, and they're going to come back strong. But that has given me tremendous exposure and experience in working with a civilian university of that scale, and then to work at the senior level, and not only that, to work with the board of trustees. They have a board of governors as well, spending a lot of time in Tallahassee working with the legislature and the ethics committees and things of that sort. So why, let me conclude with this. Why do I want to be your president? One is because I admire and I respect and I am inspired by these young men and women. And just walking around campus today, it's amazing to be around them again. It just kind of really lifts you up. If you ever are in an upset mood, just have a conversation with one of these young men and women and you'll be inspired. And I enjoy the opportunity to be part of their development and to set the conditions for their success. And at this point in my life, I have no other desire but to give back. And this is an incredible opportunity to be able to do that. So thanks, and sorry I went over. I really look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of us have read a lot about your very interesting career. My name is Frank Avignoni from the physics department. I'm also a third-generation Italian, but I didn't change the name. I would like to know what would be your highest priorities if you became president here. What would be your main goals and priorities as number one?
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, but my priority will be established by me understanding the circumstances, understanding what's happening right there, talking to as many people as I can. And I've learned a lot just by being out here today, but I look forward to spending some time and then coming up with what I think the list of priorities. In studying USC and speaking with some of the leaders there, I think the right priority is, and I've seen your strategic plan, which I think is outstanding, is to make sure that that strategic plan is properly aligned, and more important, to ensure that the right resources are in place to support those strategic objectives. There's going to be a lot of other requirements that are going to be competing for those resources, but we want to make sure that those resources are the right way. I've heard some conversation about pursuing an AAU university and moving in that direction, which I think, knowing that West Point was the preeminent leader development institution in the world, if you're going to join that level of preeminence, I think that's a worthy goal to be able to do that. But I think it's a collective decision that we all collectively ought to make. And I'll be glad once I see that consensus, we can move in that direction. But it's important that if you move in that direction, to look at not only the resources that's going to be required to get there, but the other programs that will now not get those resources, and the unintended consequences of going in that direction. If you're going to throw so much, you have limited resources, you're going to throw so much resources into an AAU pursuit, there's going to be some bill payers out there. Who are the bill payers and what are the consequences of that? And that's an important part of that decision. You know, Carnegie Level 1 research is a very admirable level right now, but going all the way up to AAU is a huge leap, as you know, to get to that point. So, okay, thank you. Next question? All right, right there. Go. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm a third-year broadcast journalism student here at USC, and a major part of my major is doing a lot of research. And I did some research on you, and I noticed you have some Trump affiliation, and Trump is known for not really respecting or supporting the LGBT community here. And I was wondering how you plan on supporting and protecting the LGBT community here.
Well, I will be proud to say that 2 weeks ago, I got West Point's award for LGBTQ diversity. It was West Point's award, their annual award I received. I've had 3 awards for diversity, for my diversity efforts. 2 of them are national level awards. And then 2 weeks ago, I got the West Point Award. And the West Point Award was not so much diversity from an ethnic standpoint, but was diversity addressing LGBT issues. And I was, you know, to me, I was passionate about that because the way I looked at it is that regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your faith or no faith, regardless of your gender, regardless of your gender orientation, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of your political affiliation, if you wanted to serve your country and you met the standards and had the ability to do so, then you ought to be able to serve your country. And that's what I firmly believe. And there's all kinds of great men and women that we know and that we work with over the years that come from that community that are, you know, honorably and fully qualified to serve in their country right now. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Hi, good afternoon, General Caslen. I have a statement to read and a question to ask you, if that's all right. So, in its 218-year history, the University of South Carolina has had 28 presidents. Some of them were remembered, and some left little mark on this place, but they all shared this. All 28 past presidents of the University of South Carolina have been men. The search committee appointed to identify the next president was 82% male. The committee selected 11 male semifinalists and then 4 finalists who were also men. We are not attacking the qualifications of you or any of the other candidates. We are criticizing the process that led to their selection. The university takes pride in the makeup of its student body, and though women comprise 55% of undergraduates on this campus, they lacked equal representation. The president is the face of our institution and represents University of South Carolina to the outside world. He or she symbolizes the university itself, embodying the values of our Carolina Creed. The president is a reflection of the university, and yet we were given a search committee that looked nothing like the body it was supposed to represent, and they gave us a finalist pool that is not representative of the students they are trying to lead. Though we noticed inequality in the committee in the fall, we did not choose to act because the committee expressed an interest in diversity. We gave them the benefit of the doubt and trusted that they would deliver. They have failed, and now we are speaking up. Today, we represent over 40 student organizations and more than 100 faculty and staff from the University of South Carolina Columbia campus. We are faith groups and pre-professional organizations, student activists, and social clubs. Our organizations have different goals, different memberships, and often very different opinions, but we are united in our frustration at the inability of the selection committee to produce a representative pool of finalists. This search committee does not look like us, and as a result, neither do their finalists. We need to start again. We are calling on the trustees of this university to add more diverse voices to the search committee. We ask for more transparency and an honest conversation about why there is an absence of female representation. We are calling on this new committee to reform their methods, to fix what caused them to miss qualified women for this position, and to return with a diverse pool of finalists that are qualified to lead this university. You cannot be what you cannot see. If the role of this university is to train the future leaders of our state, our country, and our world, the University of South Carolina cannot continue to leave off half of its students underrepresented and present an image that excludes women. For all the strides women have made over the years, we congratulate this university on enrolling and employing women at high rates. Women remain barred from the university's highest office. This moment, this presidential search, is our opportunity for progress. USC boasts that there are no limits on what we can learn, experience, and achieve, yet its highest office has been limited exclusively to men. By maintaining an all-male presidency, the university is placing limitations on women and their ability to have their voices heard at the highest echelons of USC. It has been 218 years. If we do not use this opportunity to shatter these limits, when will we? My question for you, General Caslen, is if you were selected as president, you would have a role in selecting the next provost of this university. If your committee identified only 11 candidates, all of them men, would you consider this an acceptable result, or would you demand more gender diversity?
No, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would just say, hopefully I've proven to you that I'm not opposed to hiring women for senior level positions. So in the history of West Point, I hired the first female provost. In the history of West Point, I hired the first female who was the Dean of Student Affairs. For the first time in the history of West Point, we brought on an African-American woman to be in charge of the entire student body. So these are all historical moves that occurred under my timeline. So you can rest assured that I am a full buy-in of all of that. The search process has a number of variables, and as you know, it's in confidence, for the confidence and the protection of all the different applicants, all the way up to they announce the 4 finalists, and then it goes public. So there's a lot of variables in there that we don't know of. And I know a lot, and your statement makes some assumptions of those variables, but we don't know what those variables are. We don't know how many women applied. We don't know what the quality and the merit of the women were that did apply. We don't know that, you know. So it's hard to be able to judge what we don't know because we just don't know that element of it. So if there was a woman that applied that was not fully qualified, or didn't meet the requirements, and it was elevated all the way up, you know, I suppose, I don't know. I mean, that would be up to search committee how they would want to do something like that. But nonetheless, these are variables that are not part of, that we in the public don't, and I personally don't know how all that works. I have sat on search committees, so I know how the process works, but a lot depends on some variables that we don't know exist right now.
So if you were elected president and a committee brought forward to you 11 male finalists to be the next provost of this university, and that was it, you would accept that?
Okay, so I've done that. That's come up to me before. And I said, okay, show me the applicants. And then I would say, tell me why that was not selected, tell me why this was not selected. And I would either agree or disagree, and then I would elevate it, or I would concur with what the recommendation was. Because every single one of the deans that were selected and the associate deans, I had, as the president, I had approval of them all. And when the search committee came in and said, this is our recommendation, it was a white male, I say, all right, show me your applicants, show me where the ethnicity is, and then show me where the gender diversity is. And I said, well, how come we couldn't get more applicants? You know, why are we not getting them? What was your effort to go find these applicants? This is the conversations I've had. And sometimes I called it a failed search and said, go back and find the applicants that you really need. And other times, the fact was we were not getting the applicants of the level of merit or the quantity that was necessary because it just was not in that particular pool. So I had to accept the recommendation. So I don't know the circumstances of this one, but I do know, having participated in search committees, those are some of the challenges that are out there. But you can bet that I would do exactly the same thing if I were the president right here and someone gave me a slate of all males and no females. I understand how important it is. And you don't have to worry about me hiring a woman to a senior position.
Thank you for your answer.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your presentation and insight into your background. I'm Dr. Lois Duke Whitaker, Professor Emerita of Political Science, PhD in philosophy from this great university. Listening to your qualifications raises the question. During my more than 30 years in the academy, I've seen some administrative disasters. My question to you, would you please, pardon? Administrative disasters in the academic academy, not West Point, academic academy. We refer to it as academy, generally speaking. Well, didn't mean to alarm you there. My question to you, how and why do you think you would be a good fit for the University of South Carolina? And as you address my question, would you reflect on how this would apply to faculty, students, staff, and alum? Thank you.
Well, I think I would be a good fit for a number of reasons. Number one is I would listen. The fact that I have not had a career in academic administration, and I have not been a professor at an academic university, the fact that I don't have a terminal degree is going to force me to listen, and it's going to force me to understand. I'm a good listener, and I'm a good understander of what those are, and I can hopefully identify where some of the issues are to find out how best to address those issues. Second, hopefully I made the case that I can deal with disparaging groups that are out there to build trust. The most effective element in any organization is trust, and trust is a function of character and competence. And it's important to identify where that trust exists and where it's not, and what it's going to take to build that trust. As I mentioned, negotiating between Sunnis and Shias and standing between guns pointing at each other, it's tough to gain trust with not only each one of those sides, but then between both of them together. But we were able to be successful because we found common ground, and we worked behind the scenes as necessary, and then we were able to make progress to do some of those things. I'm not saying working with the faculty would be like working with the Sunnis or the Shias. Could be. But, you know, it's that type of ability to understand and listen. I think that's important. Next, I think it's important that I've had great success in building teams where everybody feels that they're a valued member, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their faith, no faith, political affiliation, or whatever. Because if you're going to be a leader, you have to build a team where people not only feel good about them, they feel good about the mission and the purpose, but they feel good about themselves in your presence. And when they feel good about themselves in your presence, then they're going to be inspired to want to work and to support what the purpose and mission is. And I think that's important. So that's what leaders do, build teams, you know, and I think that's important. So I think these are all really basic leadership skills that I've learned over my life and that I've seen successful in other organizations that I've led, and I would do it again were I to be your president. Not sure I answered your question, what you were looking for, but okay. Yep.
Hello, I'm a student here at the University of South Carolina, and I wanted to ask you about an incident last summer. So, in the summer of 2018, one of those inspiring young men that you've talked so much about made a social media post denouncing the American imperialism that you so blatantly celebrate. After this went viral, not only was he put under investigation and dismissed from the Army, you launched a massive investigation at West Point, grilling hundreds of students on their political opinions. Yet you don't seem to have any problems expressing your own political opinions, posing for pictures with people holding Trump signs at pep rallies or showing up in evangelical fundraising videos. So my question then is, do you intend to continue your campaign of red baiting here at USC? So you launched an investigation of West Point students' political views because of their association with someone who denounced, I think correctly, the American imperialist agenda that you have been so successful at forwarding. And so it's the commie cadet incident, if that is, it rings a bell.
Okay, so let me give the background of this. So 2 years after this cadet graduated, he posted a social media picture of himself on graduation day with a T-shirt of a guy who is a communist, and so he claimed to be an advocate communist. So people start saying, so someone's a communist in the United States Army and he went to West Point, that doesn't make sense. So the investigation I'm not sure where you got the fact that I was investigating people who had political views. That was not the case. The investigation was, how did this guy get through West Point?
So you saw that as a problem?
So how did this guy get through West Point? Because he had other disciplinary issues. And where did we as an organization fail to identify and to make the necessary the discipline changes. So that was what the investigation was. It was an investigation of process. It was not an investigation of any student's political beliefs. So I'm not sure where you got that. I'd love to know, because if it's in the public domain, I'd like to challenge it.
Yeah, there's an article of an interview with that cadet, and he mentions how.
Well, trust me, I did not do an investigation of any student's political opinions.
All right.
And I wouldn't. Why would I? No, I mean, I would not do that. That's crazy. So, all right, sorry.
Yeah, so you touched on diversity earlier, but I was wondering if you could define inclusion and equity and what that looks like and means to you, as well as touch on some of the programs, techniques, initiatives you may implement as president to ensure that marginalized communities here on campus, whether that's race, gender, religion, feel included, supported, and welcomed here at USC.
Well, I think I touched on it a little bit. So inclusion to me means that everybody feels that they're a valued member of my team, of their organization. If they're a valued member, they're valued because they're treated with respect, that their opinions and their ideas are treated properly and they're felt worthwhile. And probably one of the best ways to feel if you're included is that you feel that you feel good about yourself in the presence of that group of people. So you have to create the command climate where everybody is treated with dignity and everybody is treated with respect. So it's not only you as the leader doing that, it's also make sure that everybody among themselves treats everybody that way. And that's important not only from a diverse standpoint, but it's important for not only ethnically diverse, but it's important from all the other types of diversity that you know, whether it's your race, whether it's your faith or no faith, whether it is your gender orientation, your sexual orientation, or even your political affiliation. Our job as leaders is to make everybody feel that they're a valued member of that organization. The truth of the matter is that everybody who is coming from all those disparaging groups has ideas and thoughts that are unique to them, representing the group that they come from, and it contributes to the good of the whole. And the whole becomes better and stronger as a result of that. That's, you know, the common reason why that's so important. We took on this very carefully at West Point, not only from the diversity that we thought was necessary to create, but also in our responsibility to develop leaders who were leaders of diverse units. So West Point, to get to West Point, you come from all areas across the country. You're nominated by your senator or your congressman or your congresswoman, and so you come from all aspects of America, from all different societies, and as a result, you know, you come with a lot of different biases, and it's important for us at West Point in the development of them so that we know what our biases are and we know how to deal with them, and we have the right mentors in place to guide these people through this so that when they graduate from the military academy and are in charge of 40 men and women that are very diverse, that they know what it means, despite whatever bias they may have, that they know what it means to build a diverse team. And that's what inclusion's all about. That's my thought about it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
And I think this is our last question.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep you as on time as possible, but one of the things that attracted me to USC throughout my college admissions process was the fact that it's a Carolina community and a Gamecock family, and one of the things that makes President Pastides so well loved is the involvement of both him and his wife in student life. So I was wondering how you plan to be involved with your family in student life and connecting from not just as the president, but as a member of the Carolina family.
Yeah, well, you know, the students at West Point I was the superintendent, which is like the president. So the students at West Point called me Soup Daddy. So, and I earned that beloved name because I was with them a lot, you know. So I would lead the football team with a Harley motorcycle coming out of the locker room for the game. I would rappel off the towers in front of the student body so that, you know, when there was a big ceremony or something like that. I would skydive in a tandem right there in the plane when the cadets were all lined up and that sort of thing. And then on every Wednesday morning, I would invite as many students as they wanted to do PT with me. It was an aerobic sort of workout, pretty strenuous. And those that did 10 workouts in a row, I gave them one of my coins, the superintendent's coins. So my intent here is to know as many students as I can, to engage with them in as many opportunities that are out there, and to make sure my calendar is free enough that enables me to be able to do that, to visit them in their classrooms, to visit them in the laboratories, to visit them on the athletic fields, to attend their home and away games because it gives me an opportunity to deal with graduates that live in that area as well. And my wife is incredible. She's been a tremendous support and spouse of, she actually mentored a lot of women, and there's women graduates that email her almost every other day, just giving updates how things are going and stuff like that, because of the relationships that she's made with a number of them. So we intend to do that again, and you'll probably say, well, here he is again, so. All right.
One last question.
Okay, from a veteran.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
General Caslen, I'm Dr. David Snyder. I teach in the history department here. Thank you for being here. You see from my T-shirt, 30 years ago, I would have saluted you as Specialist David Snyder. You would have been captain, lieutenant, perhaps. I think I'm one of the few faculty members here who is a former veteran. I'm happy to acknowledge my service. I honor your obviously much more substantial service. My question is a constitutional question. One of the most vexing challenges that this or any campus has across the country these days center on First Amendment issues. Freedom of speech, for example, is something that we wrestle with almost every day. My question to you is not a freedom of speech question. It is a separation of church and state question. So here at this great public institution, can you speak to why the separation of church and state is important for us on this campus?
Separation of church and state, right? Well, that's a great question. And matter of fact, I got caught up in the controversy of that personally when I was a brigadier general, without going into a lot of details. But I learned an awful lot out of that particular experience because, first of all, someone in a position of authority cannot use their position or their rank to force subordinates to do something against their constitutional rights. That is the fundamental interpretation that I have of separation between church and state. So I cannot use my position as the president to require students, to require faculty to do something, either something that from a faith-based sort of thing, to listen to a sermon, to listen to me professing religious beliefs, because that's not appropriate. I would be using my position to require subordinates to do something against their constitutional right. I can't do that. That's not right. In a public institution, I cannot use my position to endorse a private entity, whether that's a religious entity or whether it's any other private entity, because what it does, it's not my personal endorsement, it's an endorsement of the institution, the public institution. So that too is against the ethics rules that we have when it comes to church and state. But what do leaders do? Leaders are leaders who build teams. Leaders are leaders who recognize that why would I want to do something, to say something that's going to be offensive to the people of my group? I want to say things that are going to lift them up. I want to say things that are going to edify them and build them up instead. You see, so that's what leaders do. And this is kind of the conversation from the previous question was, how do you build inclusive teams? And it's not by being derogatory towards one faith or other faith, coming from a position of authority, particularly in a public institution, but it's important that you edify and build up and to lift them up, and that's what leaders do. So they build people up in that capacity instead. But the fundamental issue is, I understand it, and what I've learned, particularly in public universities, is you can't use your position of authority or you can't use your rank to require subordinates to do something that's contrary to constitutional rights. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much, General Caslen. Thank you. Thank you all.